Demolition derbies can get heated, like any sport. In Westport last weekend, a driver started yelling at the judges, and that's not allowed. But then the police came as he was getting back in his car. They grabbed him out and threw him on the ground. The incident was captured clearly on video. We hear from the driver and the sheriff on today's story of the day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Pearsall Wealth Management at UBS Wealth Management USA, subsidiary UBS AG, member FINRA SIPC, 1 Broad Street, Glens Falls.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Monday, August 28th. First up, a recent audit on the use of workers' compensation by New York prison guards shows some signs of possible fraud. New York State Inspector General Lucy Lang says one example is so-called couples comp,
where we would see two married people or people who were in a relationship who both were employed who would either be out on comp at the same time for a long stretch or who would take alternating comp, perhaps to provide childcare or fill in other kinds of gaps.
Lang spoke on the public radio show Capitol Press Room. She said at some facilities there were huge numbers of people out on workers' comp, but the majority of them were not related to contact with an incarcerated person. She said the number of workers' comp cases at prisons were high compared to other state agencies.
This is very detrimental, not just to the incarcerated people who rely on a full staff to ensure that they get the programming to which they're entitled, but to other staff as well who end up having to do mandatory overtime, double shifts, etc., to make up for the staffing gaps.
Lang says the report is to educate lawmakers, prison administrators, and the public so they can have a voice in calling for change if it's necessary. The Inspector General's office is continuing to investigate instances where there are indicators of fraud. The band Phish raised millions of dollars for flood victims in Vermont and New York at its shows last weekend in Saratoga. The band performed at the Saratoga Performing Arts Center on Friday and Saturday. All net proceeds to their ticket sales and merchandise from those shows will be donated to flood relief efforts. According to the Albany Times-Union, the band raised $3.5 million in donations over the weekend and sold more than 38,000 tickets. Phish is still accepting donations for flood victims through its philanthropic organization known as the Water Wheel Foundation. A violent incident at the demolition derby in Westport last weekend is raising questions about police use of force. An Essex County Sheriff's deputy dragged a driver out of his stock car after he yelled at judges. The sheriff says his officer's actions were appropriate. Kara Chapman reports.
Video obtained by NCPR shows driver Devin Fournier getting out of his banged-up car, standing on the hood, and yelling at an official during a heat at last weekend's demolition derby at the Essex County Fair. He then climbs down and keeps yelling. Arguing with the judges isn't allowed. We reached Fournier Thursday. He says he disagreed with the officials' calls.
After I knew that they weren't going to let me keep running, I was like, screw it. I'll just shut my car off or drive my car off the track is what I was trying to do.
It's what happened next that caught people's attention. The video shows Fournier walking back to his car, taking off his helmet and throwing it inside. As he walks around the front, Sergeant Justin Bobby with the Essex County Sheriff's Office approaches him. The two exchange words for a second as Fournier starts to get back into his car through the driver's side window. The sergeant reaches for Fournier's arm and he whips around. Then the sergeant grabs the back of his neck and pulls him down. The crowd roars. As the two struggle, Fournier holds on to the window frame until another deputy walks up and pulls his hand off. Sergeant Bobby drags him to the ground. Another video shows the sergeant trying to bring Fournier's arm behind his back and kneeling on Fournier to keep him down. As this happens, two more deputies walk over. Fournier and Sergeant Bobby can then be seen talking to each other for a moment, with Fournier still on the ground and gesturing towards the exit. The sergeant helps him up, and someone in the crowd heckles the deputies. The four officers follow Fournier as he walks off the track to the infield. Fournier steps over the cement barrier, then turns back to the crowd to take a bow before walking off. NCPR called Essex County Sheriff David Reynolds about the incident. He says, based on the video he's seen and what first responders who were there have said, he thinks Sergeant Bobby made the right call when he pulled Fournier from his vehicle.
I don't want to speak for the deputy, but I think his mindset was he's pretty irate. I'm not going to let him get back in this car, and weaponize this 4,000-pound vehicle.
Reynolds says he doesn't believe there was an excessive use of force. He says if he thought there was, he would consult his department policies and follow a procedure that could result in Sergeant Bobby's suspension or termination. Fournier says he's seen deputies walk people off the track at derbies and tell them to go home, but he says he hasn't seen people getting ripped out of their cars and slammed on the ground.
I really didn't do anything wrong to deserve that. I mean, if they would have came over and been like, hey, just walk off the track, shut your car off, walk off the track, I would have been like, okay, let's do it. Let me shut my car off. They didn't really give me an option to do anything but get out of your car and get on the ground.
Reynolds insists that Fournier was given the opportunity to leave before Sergeant Bobby pulled him out of his car.
Our main goal is safety, and he was going to get in that car. Maybe he wouldn't do anything, but we don't know that. And at that point, he was not listening to the race officials or the deputies.
Fournier says the back of his knees were ripped up, and he's got a bruise on his back from the incident. Reynolds says none of his deputies were injured. Fournier wasn't charged with anything after the deputies walked him off the track. According to Sheriff Reynolds, his officers have discretion when it comes to whether they arrest someone.
I don't think the guy was intentionally doing anything, towards the deputy or anybody. He was just agitated.
The sheriff says at this point he thinks it's a closed incident. Fournier says people have told him he has the right to press charges and should contact a lawyer. But he says overall he's trying to move past it.
Been thinking about it, but it's kind of over and done with the way I see it. Is what it is. Move past it. What's done is done.
Fournier says he plans to keep competing in demolition derbies. Sheriff Reynolds says his department does trainings around use of force, crisis intervention, and de-escalation. Pete Nelson is a co-founder of the Adirondack Diversity Initiative, which has connected Reynolds and his officers to trainings that focus on diversity and implicit bias.
In general, I think that when there's a stronger tie between police and communities, everybody benefits. And I want to stress that that's a two-way street.
Nelson says that means police and communities work to increase their understanding of each other. As for the demolition derby incident, Nelson says the Adirondack Diversity Initiative has not taken a position on the video. Speaking for himself, he says he has no comment, except to say that videos are important but don't tell the whole story. Nelson says he does not think the video presents a setback to the work the initiative has been doing to establish that two-way street between police and communities.
I think that this is difficult stuff. People are affected by police incidents, the people who are victims, the people who are suspects, the people who are witnesses, and the police officers themselves. There's nothing about this that is easy. And I think it's very important that there be intelligent dialogue.
Nelson says understanding is the ultimate goal because it's directly related to everyone's safety. Kara Chapman, North Country Public Radio.
You can watch the video of the incident for yourself on our website, ncpr.org. We have more news there all the time, ncpr.org. Music today by Eddie Lawrence of Moira and Caitlin Scholl of Lake Placid. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.